At 3:12 in the morning, the Atlantic threw a tantrum. I woke up to sirens singing off-key, palmettos bending like old men, and a foamy fist slamming into Sycamore Cove's beachfront. When the surge finally broke, it hit my stubborn, unapproved, morally offensive structure, a black basalt seawall the HOA had sworn was illegal. The wave folded, hissed, and retreated, blocked. Houses behind it blinked with power. The ones beyond the HOA-approved dunes looked like a toddler had smeared them with a wet paint roller. Somebody screamed, "It held!" And somebody else muttered, "Don't tell Sandra." I'm not a crusader. I'm Evan Harrow, a quiet structural engineer who wears the same gray hoodie like it's a uniform and takes evening walks at low tide to count pelicans and mind my blood pressure. I bought Lot 17 on Driftline Court for the view, not the neighborhood politics. The house came with a rotting wooden bulkhead that was more suggestion than structure. After hurricane season 2 years back, I watched my neighbor's yard slide into the ocean like melted ice cream. That's when I started drafting plans. Enter Sandra Withers, HOA president of Sycamore Cove, bob haircut sharp as legal stationery. Sandra had rules printed on rules, laminated and indexed. "This is a community," she'd chirp with a syrupy voice at every meeting, "not a sandbox." She wore pearls to beach cleanups. She color-coded her emails by severity: yellow for concerns, orange for violations, red for what she called neighborhood emergencies, which once included a misaligned garden gnome. My sin. I replaced that eroding, rotten bulkhead behind my property with a basalt-faced seawall, anchored to bedrock with steel-reinforced concrete footings. I'd spent 6 months on engineering calculations, hired a geotechnical firm, and filed permits with the county. The county reviewed everything: environmental impact, tidal flow patterns, erosion mitigation. They approved it unanimously. The HOA did not. "Too industrial," Sandra wrote in her first letter, printed on cream-colored cardstock. "And frankly, it's a vibe killer that disrupts our coastal aesthetic." The letters began as paper and escalated to performance art. Notice 1. Remove non-conforming barrier. Notice 2. Your wall is a menace to aesthetic harmony. Notice 3, and this one made me laugh out loud: neighbors report emotional disturbance caused by maritime aggression. Translation: waves make noise. I framed that one. Sandra started showing up unannounced with a clipboard and a contractor who looked like a thumb in cargo shorts. His name was Dale, and he nodded at everything Sandra said like a dashboard ornament. They measured. They frowned. They took photos from angles that made my wall look like a prison fortification. She trespassed repeatedly, claiming it was for accurate evaluation, photographing my property line like it was a crime scene. I'd be inside making coffee and look out to see Sandra standing in my backyard with a laser measure, muttering into her phone. She claimed my wall would redirect waves into other homes, a theory she'd apparently invented during a wine night because no engineer would ever sign off on that nonsense. She started a rumor at the community pool that I ran a seawall profiteering company and was trying to privatize the beach. Someone told me she'd actually used the phrase, coastal cartel. Even for HOA standards, this was a piñata of nonsense. At the monthly meeting, Sandra presented a PowerPoint titled Hard Edges, Hard Times, with stock photos of tsunamis, crying children standing in floodwater, and one slide that was just the word danger in red letters. She used a laser pointer for emphasis. People clapped because the coffee was free and she'd brought those little Danish pastries from the expensive bakery. I sat in the back and watched neighbors nod along like this was a TED Talk instead of a woman having a breakdown about igneous rock. Then Sandra filed a complaint with the State Coastal Commission, skipping the boring part where she'd actually read the county permit. She emailed a press release to the local paper with the subject line, "Rogue Wall Endangers Children," blind carbon copying herself 3 times like an evil echo. The paper didn't run it, but she printed copies and left them in the mailroom anyway. She called the sheriff twice in 1 week. First time, she claimed I was conducting midnight construction. The sheriff arrived to find me grilling salmon at 7 p.m., looking confused and holding tongs. He apologized, ate a piece of fish, and told me Sandra had described industrial machinery and floodlights. The second time, she reported suspicious coastal modifications. Same sheriff. He just waved from his car. But Sandra's big swing was her emergency covenant action. She staged a surprise Saturday vote to levy fines of $500 a day until demolition. Here's where it got weird. She borrowed gate fobs to pack the room with out-of-town relatives who technically didn't live in Sycamore Cove but nodded enthusiastically when Sandra spoke. She waved a stamped-looking letter that she claimed was from a marine biologist warning about structural interference with natural tidal patterns. It turned out to be a template off the internet with her own text filled in, printed on fancy paper she'd bought at a craft store. I showed up in flip-flops and a folder of actual permits, county-stamped, state-reviewed, signed by actual engineers with actual licenses. I started to explain the difference between a bulkhead and a seawall, the engineering behind load-bearing calculations, why basalt was chosen for its durability. I got about 20 seconds in before Sandra cut the mic. Literally reached over and pressed the mute button, smiling sweetly the whole time. "We've heard enough technical jargon," she announced. "Let's vote." The vote passed because half the people there didn't even live in the neighborhood. That night she taped a demolition notice to my mailbox with festive confetti tape, because apparently power must sparkle. The notice demanded I remove the wall within 14 days or face escalating fines, legal action, and potential foreclosure on my property. She signed it with a gold pen and added a little smiley face. I took a photo of it and sent it to my lawyer, who called me back laughing so hard he couldn't speak for 30 seconds. I did what quiet men do when cornered. I pulled a clean, heavy binder out of nowhere. Actually, it was from my office, but it felt cinematic. County permit with raised seal. Geotechnical survey from a firm that had done work for the state. FEMA flood maps showing my property in a high-risk zone. Structural calculations reviewed by 2 independent engineers. Emails from a very patient coastal engineer named Priya Ramanathan who specialized in erosion mitigation and had written half the guidelines Sandra claimed to be following. And because life is nothing if not petty, doorbell camera footage of Sandra stepping over my fence line 6 separate times with a tape measure, her phone, and on one memorable occasion, what looked suspiciously like a martini in a stemmed glass. Time-stamped. High definition. In one clip, you could actually hear her talking to Dale about how to make the wall look more threatening for photos. I sent the packet to the county, the state, and, cherry on the sundae, the HOA's insurer. Took me one afternoon and about $40 in certified mailing fees. The insurer's reply came back in 72 hours. It mentioned the faint, terrifying phrase, uninsurable board actions, and requested an immediate halt to all enforcement activities pending a full review of HOA governance procedures. The county sent a compliance officer in a windbreaker who lived for this exact kind of bureaucratic showdown. His name was Marcus. He had a clipboard that looked older than me. He showed up to the next HOA meeting and asked Sandra, very politely, for the HOA's authority to supersede county-approved permits. Sandra produced a trifold brochure with seashells on it and a highlighted section about community standards. Marcus produced a citation for unauthorized harassment of a compliant property owner, code violations for filing false reports, and a stern lecture about the difference between covenants and actual law. The insurer emailed again, this time copying the entire HOA board, cease all enforcement actions pending review. Translation: stop poking the engineer with the legal stick before we drop your coverage entirely. Sandra responded by forwarding a picture of a sunset with the caption, "Stay positive." Nobody knew what that meant. Then came the storm. A proper sideways rain event with a name you could embroider on a pillow, Tropical Storm Isla, making landfall on September 14th at 2:47 a.m. The HOA-approved soft solutions, aesthetic dunes with decorative sea oats, vanished in one gulp. Water shouldered down Driftline Court, looking for a weak spot. It found my wall instead. The basalt laughed. The anchors hummed. The surge rolled back like it had changed its mind. Neighbors watched from upstairs windows as the wall held the line and the street drain caught its breath. By dawn, my block stood damp but intact. Half a mile down, where a natural shoreline approach had been showcased on Sandra's PowerPoint, decks were pretzels and a Subaru was taking on saltwater like a whale. At 8:10 a.m., the local paper posted a photo, "Controversial Seawall saves Sycamore Cove block." The caption named me. It also named the HOA. The comments were a vandalism of vindication. At noon, the county engineer Priya, now on site in a yellow hard hat, did a walkthrough and loudly explained shear forces to a news camera, using Sandra's trifold brochure as a prop. The reporter asked Sandra for comment. She said with a strained smile, "We were always supportive of safety," while standing next to her demolition notice, still taped to my mailbox like a cursed fridge magnet.
The insurer finished its review.
Turns out staging fake emergency votes, trespassing, and attempting to override county permits isn't a quirky hobby, it's exposure. Premiums spiked. Then the insurer dropped the HOA entirely. The board ousted Sandra in a meeting that started with muffins and ended with a motion to audit. The audit found miscategorized landscaping funds that had been funding Sandra's Coastal Harmony yoga retreats. The county fined her personally $12,000 for misuse of HOA authority and reported her to the state attorney general for falsified notices. A judge issued a protective order forbidding her from entering within 20 feet of my property line or any tape measure without supervision. Sandra stood in that courtroom, face pale, hands shaking as the judge read the amount. $12,000, he repeated firmly. She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered in disbelief. "For what?" "I was protecting the neighborhood." The judge simply looked at her over his glasses and said, "That's not what the evidence shows, Miss Withers."